Welcome back to the Serious Games Conference focusing on artificial intelligence. For those of you who haven't been here for the first part, there are some feedback postcards, this one. We highly appreciate if you could fill this out for us, and then there's Anna in the back there behind the cameras, where you can put this in her, I think it's, what is it? It's a bowl. Just put it in the bowl there and help us to make the Serious Games Conference the next years even better than it is already. And we had a talk earlier this morning when Mr. Schäfer, the managing director of nordmedia, introduced also the APIDS lab. If you want to learn more about this, which is all dedicated to applied interactive technologies, there are also the nordmedia colleagues to tell you more about that. Haha, and there's also already our next speaker. Hi, Christian.
Hi.
You can see on your schedule that Dr. Christian Thurau is now on, telling us much more about teaching machines to see. And I already knew that there's something out there where artificial intelligence is learning on what to see on pictures. But for what Christian taught me is basically we also can do this with moving images, so videos. So we can teach artificial intelligence what to see in videos. And to give you a bit of a background from Christian, so he's based in Berlin, but his startup, which is the 20 Billion Neurons, is also based in Toronto. Which is a deep learning startup. He's using a unique crowd acting platform on which humans can demonstrate the world to machines. 20 billion neurons train computers to become aware of what they're looking at. Exactly. And just that. So I think I would leave that with you, but you have a doctor in machine learning, right?
Yeah, true.
So after we listen to your friend Georges, now that is kind of also the second speaker with us here with a scientific background. And I think I leave you here and say the stage is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So, so basically in this talk, I want to talk about computer vision and what we at 20 Billion Neurons are doing in that field. So basically the idea behind computer vision has been for the last, I would say, 50 or 60 years to enable machines to visually perceive our world, to basically see. And so to explain a bit better what I mean by that, I want to show you a little video where you can see our AI and how it actually sees the world and what it can recognize. So this is a deep neural network that was trained on a huge amount of videos that we have gathered. So what you see there in blue is usually what the AI thinks it sees. So we don't recognize objects here. That's why you always see this term something. So we have replaced all objects by the term something. And then you can see covering something with something. I will make the movie a bit faster, so it's a bit, so I don't waste too much time on this. So this is fairly basic stuff, right? Sort of everyday object interaction. So you pour water into a cup, and then this is actually quite nice, showing that something is empty. Picking something up. And the longer the video goes, the more complex the activities will get or the object interactions. So now you can also see that the camera movement is also part of the recognized classes. In total, this neural network can recognize more than 350 disjoint visual classes. So also hand gestures, so someone is doing some hand gestures in there. This is Guillaume, he's from our research team in Toronto. So some more weird hand gestures. And you see it's working reasonably well. So this model, we built it last year in September. And back then, and still now, it's probably the most advanced video understanding AI that currently exists. So it can really recognize all sorts of things, right? So now a person drinking. And this is also not staged. This was just a single take, right? So turning the camera downwards while filming, and this is now also funny. I mean, I've now seen the video many times. He revealed the chair, so he was moving to the side and they revealed the chair behind that. Person walking by from right to left, person sitting down. I think you get the point, right? So the goal that we have is to develop an AI that is able of seeing our world in a similar way as humans do, and then sort of describing what it sees in the video. This is also interesting, so it was recognized wrong, showing something there and catching it. Sometimes the predictions are wrong, and then it's recognized that he let his pullover fall. So how did we end up here, right? So how come that we have seen over the last years just such a progress in computer vision, and what we believe sort of the next steps? And to explain that a bit more in detail, I want to concentrate also a bit more on the problematic sides of computer vision, right? So this is actually, it's quite a good example for that, right? So for us humans, we always think, vision is very easy, we can just see everything. But here you can see it's actually quite difficult, right? So when you just have a look at the pixel values of the different dog and muffin images, you will see they're actually quite close to each other. So the color is similar, you have the eyes, which are also similar sometimes. So it's actually not such an easy task. And then, of course, you have to think about how an AI actually learns from all this training data that it usually has. So it's not super straightforward to solve this task. So a couple of years back, in 2012, we actually saw some smart people applied, sort of the idea of deep learning started. So that's when people used very large amounts of training data, of labeled images, to recognize objects in images. So for example, like that. So the task is relatively simple. You want to recognize that there are certain entities or objects in an image, like here, a cat and a dog. So this was really, for the past, I would say 50 or 60 years, one of the most important tasks in computer vision that people really tried to solve. And up to 2012, there was there was some progress, right? There were thousands of smart people all around the world working on this problem, really only to recognize objects and images. But it could never be really solved. So up to 2012, you were happy when you could recognize a red apple in front of a white paper or something like that, something which is really an artificial problem. But then in 2012, people in Toronto applied really this idea of deep learning, or invented the idea of deep learning, which is quite simple. I will come to it on the next slide. Until then, what you could see that you have a degrade in the errors that the AI makes in 2012. It really went down really quickly. And then within 4 years, we managed to surpass human level recognition rates for the task of object recognition in images, which is really astounding, right? For 50 years, we couldn't solve this problem at all. Then we had the first breakthrough with deep learning, and in 4 years, these AIs are better than humans at the task. They're still making mistakes, but at least you can measure in benchmarks. This is now working extremely well. So just going very, very quickly on this, there were a lot of talks, of course, also at ZBIT about AI and deep learning. But what it really is, from my point of view, it really is it's a paradigm shift in software engineering. So you can also call it software 2.0. So what it does is actually, in a way, it's quite simple. So with that, you can now write programs for tasks that you don't really understand, but that you can describe by data. So for example, going back to the task of object recognition, we had no idea how actually to write an algorithm or software that would be able of recognizing things in an image. People tried that a lot, right? Trying to match shapes, and then trying to, when you want to recognize a dog, you can say, okay, I'm looking for a nose, and then I'm looking for the ears and fur and all of these things. People tried a lot of things, none of this really worked. What did work, however, is to really just take a huge amount of label training data, then take a deep neural network, or just an algorithm with a lot of parameters that you can tune to the problem, and then you need a learning algorithm to train that. And out of that, you get a trained neural network or a new program, so that if you feed it a new image, it's now able of actually performing this task of object recognition. And we still don't really have understood, how we as humans could write this software. So basically, we probably have to accept that there are certain types of software or tasks that we cannot really describe and where we cannot find a program for. But if you use data for that, an algorithm can actually find a program that solves the task. And as I said, so what does it mean, large labeled training data? It simply means a lot of example images of, for example, cats and dogs. And it's really thousands of images that you need where you know exactly, okay, this is the cat, this is the dog. And how it works, also just in a nutshell, you feed a couple of images, for example, with cats to the neural network. Then the neural network predicts maybe, okay, there's a dog in the image, so it is wrong. Then you adjust the neural network with a learning algorithm, the backpropagation algorithm, so that it is more likely for this particular training image to output that it has seen a dog. And when you do that a couple of, million times, you end up with a tuned model that is able of recognizing these things in images. So far, so good. So we have solved this problem. But, how to actually continue from that, right? So for images, it's kind of, it's shown to be relatively easy to gather certain amounts of training data where we have, lots of cats and dogs in the image. But what about moving images, right? So this is just also a fairly simple example. It's just a scene. It will repeat in a few seconds. So there's just a person entering through a door. And I would say up to 1 or 2 years ago, even though object recognition now was solved, so an algorithm could detect, okay, there's a person in the image, or in the video even, frame by frame, there's a door maybe. Still, we didn't have an AI that could actually recognize what's happening there, that the human is entering through a door. So this whole information, which is, for humans it's always so difficult to see that, right? So it's so difficult to discriminate between tasks which are difficult for an AI to learn and which are easy for an AI to learn. And this particular task used to be super difficult, so no one had a solution to that up until now. And the reason was not that neural networks are not working or that, we didn't have the right algorithms. In this case, actually, the problem seemed to be more the data. And which is also, I think, a very interesting insight. So a lot of what you see nowadays in machine learning research and in computer vision is more built on data than it is built on the algorithms. So the algorithms are still very interesting, these neural networks, but you shouldn't expect, there will be more breakthroughs, they will be made smaller and more efficient and so on, but at the end, what people are now more looking for is the right data. When you got the right data for the right tasks, you can solve a novel problem with that. And that's why everyone is now looking to the big tech giants which have this very specific data for certain applications. But that's why you also see so many startups now coming up with novel ideas on how to generate the right data. So now you might ask, okay, why don't you just go to YouTube, right? YouTube has millions or even billions of videos on there. You just do the normal approach that people did for image understanding. You download the videos, and then you have humans label the data, right? So people did that many times. So there are a lot of data sets, YouTube-based data sets out there. But it showed to be not really the ideal case for, at least not for teaching an AI sort of more normal things about our world. You will find tons of videos where people are skiing or playing football or doing bull riding or all sorts of other funny things, making selfies and talking to the camera, but it doesn't really depict in many ways the real world. And the other problem is, so you do not really see the sort of everyday activities. And what we would expect from an AI in the future or from a robot is that it actually should understand our real world. And because this is what we see all the time, but this is not what we film when we put it on YouTube, unfortunately. And then also, it's impossible to collect actually task-specific data sets. A very good example is, for example, gesture recognition, right? So when you think about science fiction movies, there's always this actor sometimes interacting with the computer with hand gestures and doing all sorts of weird things, and the machine knows what's happening there. So in order to solve that with the deep learning approach, you would need massive amounts of data of these hand gestures. But these you cannot really find on YouTube, right? So you can maybe sometimes find someone like thumbs up or something like that, but this is not really the kind of hand gestures you might be looking for. So what we did is actually, it sounds a bit like a moonshot mission, right? So 2 years back when we founded the company, we started building up a web platform, and you could probably call it sort of world's largest movie studio in the cloud. So there what we do, we employ crowd workers to film data for us. The idea is really simple. We also call it inverse labeling. So instead of labeling video data that we already have, we take a label and we send that label out to thousands of crowd workers all around the world. So currently we have more than 50,000 actors there. So for example, when you want to teach your AI how it looks like when someone is drinking a coffee, you take that label, maybe you make even a sample video of that when you are drinking a coffee, you pass it over to our cloud platform, and there instantly thousands of people all around the world will pick up the label. They will then film themselves while they drink a coffee. It even looks a bit like a movie studio, so they have this counter counting downwards from 3 to 1, and then they're recorded. If they think it's okay, they will upload the video to our data platform, and then we have another video, another example that actually shows what the human was doing there. And based on that, we created now millions of videos showing all sorts of things of the real world. And this is probably the only way that we have to generate really meaningful data that we need for the real world, for machines to understand in what kind of world we're living actually, and how it functions. So to give you an idea on the amount of data variability that we can generate there. So it goes from sort of everyday activities in general. So we have data sets in supermarkets, right? Where people are putting, goods out of the shelf, putting them into their shopping case. We have lots of videos on interactivity, gesture recognition, but also human emotions. We have complex object interactions, which I will come to that a bit later in the end of the talk, which is also, I think, a very, very, very important part that so far you couldn't get any data on. And also, of course, person interaction. So we have lots of data on human activities, people walking, running, interactions, people hugging each other, and so on. And to give you again another very simple example on how then such a system could look at, I mentioned the gesture recognition. So you can see a fairly simple gesture recognition system. Just recognize swiping gestures, so in blue you can always see what it recognizes. And this is built on a gesture recognition data set that we have generated with our platform. It consists of a few 100,000 videos showing in total more than 25 different hand gestures. This is now the largest hand gesture recognition data set in the world. It was also the first approach where actually someone tried to solve hand gesture recognition, not with some special hardware like a time-of-flight camera, but just with this not of pure deep learning approach, just taking the raw data, taking the labels and the neural network, and then training on the data. And it works extremely well, actually. So also, if you want to experiment with the data set, we have released it for academic use. So this is a smaller version of the data set, so feel free to download it. We also have a leaderboard on the data set. It's fairly interesting. So there you can also submit the recognition rates that you receive with your approach. Currently, it ranks high in the 90s. So I think it's fair to say that this problem is now solved. So the problem of recognizing hand gestures from standard video data is solved. And for the last part of the talk, I want you to look a bit more into the future. So I know talked a lot about teaching machines to see and how to generate the right data and then how to train the neural networks. But basically, all of this is, of course, to some extent also part of a bigger picture. And this is about common sense. So what is common sense? And for that, on the next 2 slides, at least I have 2 slides where there's a bit about games. So for this, I want to show you a very typical artificial intelligence that we can see now many times. And this is a reinforcement learning agent that is learning to play the game of Pong, right? So, and it takes its time, right? So reinforcement learning, it means basically that the player sometimes hits the ball, and then maybe he gets a positive reward, and then over time, positive signals through the points are transmitted, and then eventually the AI comes up with a strategy of playing this game. This takes many thousand games of play to learn that. If I would want to explain this game to you, to actually teach you how to play in this game, I would probably say something, hey, this is a game of tennis. You have a bat and a ball, and then you make sure that the ball is always in the field of the opponent, right? So, and you would immediately understand the game. And this is astounding, because this doesn't really look like tennis players, right? It's just on the right side, it's 4 or so green pixels. On the left side, it's 6 or 4 red pixels. Even the ball isn't round, right? It doesn't look at all like a tennis match. But still, you would really grasp the idea of that, which is fascinating. Because you have an idea, of course, how our world works. You know what tennis is, you know what a ball is, you know how to play games. So it's very easy for you, even though it's a very abstract representation of that, to actually understand that. And to give you another example, and this is a very interesting paper that appeared this year at iClear. So, I quickly explain what this is about. So basically what you can see here on the left is a very, very simple jump and run game, right? What you can see on that, it really looks a bit more or less like, the real world. So there's it doesn't look like the real world, but at least you have something that could resemble a human. It has a head and 2 legs. You have ladders, right? So we know how ladders work. Then you have these ledges you can walk there. And when you jump in the air, you also fell down because of gravity. So, so far so good. So when a human is learning to play this game, it takes him about 2 minutes to do that. Simply because we know how, we can really understand what we can see there. And from that, we can infer the functionality of this. This is really easy to us. So what the researchers here did, they actually replaced the visual appearance that you can see on the left side with these completely weird blocks you can see on the right side. And then it turns out a human can still learn the game. The game is still the same, right? It doesn't look like anything you would have ever you cannot see similarities to anything in the real world, right? And then it takes a human player up to 20 minutes to actually learn the game. For an AI, it doesn't make a difference. It learns the left game at the same speed as it would learn the right game. And this is, I think, fairly interesting, right? So if we are able of teaching AI common sense about things about our world, and this doesn't have to be anything complex, right? It has to be very simple concepts, maybe like gravity, right? When I let an object fall, it always falls to the ground, never to the ceiling. We take all of this as granted. And the right side also gives you a good idea, actually, how difficult a lot of these tasks are for an AI, because they never start with any prior knowledge about our world. So when an AI is learning to recognize things, to recognize objects in an image, it just gets all the data there is, but of course it doesn't have any prior knowledge about that we are living in a 3-dimensional world, that there are certain entities that exist that can move around. It doesn't know any of the concepts that are usually there, like occlusion. So when you hide an object behind other objects, it's still there. It's just occluded. Object permanency, right? And this also reflects actually in many other ways, right? It also has an impact on language. So this is another good example. For us, this is very easy to understand the sentence. So the trophy did not fit into the suitcase because it was too big. What is it? How should an AI that does not have an understanding about how our world looks like and how it behaves, what it actually means when you put something into something else, how should it understand that? It's completely impossible. But for us, it's very easy to do that. So we believe that to some extent, this kind of common sense learning has to be derived from visual sensors. So it's a good way of getting this kind of information into the AI. And you could see some of the results in the video that I showed at the beginning. So we have hundreds of thousands of videos put together in a data set that we call the something data set. So, and this is basically, as I said before, something because we don't use the object names for that. And this is really lots of interesting different activities that also take into account the things I just mentioned about how our world functions. So you have tons of videos where people are dropping objects and they're always falling to the ground, or where people are hiding objects behind others. You have videos where people are pouring liquids into other objects to understand that there is something like a liquid in our world, or that there are liquids. And to give you some more concrete examples for that, here's, for example, a very simple video. So this is just part of the training, of the test data in that case, but it basically shows simply, let me repeat it, someone dropping a piece of paper, and this is then falling to the ground. So I mentioned before, we have trained our neural networks with these huge amounts of data. And here you can see what it actually predicted for that. So luckily, it matched the ground truth in the first prediction, something falling like a feather. But also the other predictions, which come in second or third, are not completely off. So at least they give you an understanding that the network learned something reasonable, right? Something falling like a rock, okay, this is not it, obviously, it's falling faster, but maybe it's in between, right? And also the other things that are potentially recognized are not completely off, dropping in front of something, and so on. Or also here, this is more about learning the relations of objects to each other. So the ground truth label is here taking one of many similar things on the table. And when you have such a label for your videos that you have, these are much more complex than just having a label spoon, right? Or maybe 5 spoons next to each other. It's really, it pushes the neural networks or the models to learn a representation that enables it to recognize these particular patterns. So basically, in order to recognize that, the neural networks has to develop a representation where it can actually not only see that there are that there are certain objects next to each other, which are also similar in visual appearance, but then it also sees the activity that someone is grasping there and putting out one of the objects. So, about that, so what I just thought about common sense, I mean, this I have to say, it's a bit more futuristic, but you're of course very welcome to play around with the data sets. A lot of research groups are already doing that, so with some really, really great results. I would really encourage you to have a look at the dataset page, so there we also have a ranking of the different approaches. It's super interesting, I think. And just quickly about the company, I mean, I didn't want to talk too much in this talk about the business side of things, but basically we were founded in 2015. My 2 co-founders and I, we all have a background in machine learning, so we are in the field for 15 years. Our goal is really to make cameras see just like the human eye. And the approach that we have there is purely data-driven. So by generating more data and the right data with the right labels, we think this is possible. And ultimately, we believe this kind of software will run on the edge. So basically, you can put it into cameras or everywhere to really have the smaller devices that are really able of seeing our world as we do it. Currently, we have 22 people in Berlin and Toronto. And yeah, well, not going too much into the business side, but obviously, I mean, with our first customers, we now work for different applications, solving different use cases in different fields. Most are a bit centered around human activity recognition, but of course, we also want to go much further. Human-machine interaction, I think, is also a field that will probably take off within the next years to really this sort of increased capabilities of machines being able of perceiving our world. So thank you very much for your attention. Questions, so I come.
Christian, this was German precise, on time, on the minute.